All right, just imagine this for a second. How is it even humanly possible to perfectly preserve one single man's exact words, his daily actions, and even his really subtle reactions over 1,400 years? And doing all of this without the internet, without smartphones, printing presses, or, any recording devices whatsoever. Well, we're going to take a fascinating journey into exactly that. This is one of the most awe-inspiring historical and academic feats in human history, the science of Hadith. It's the second major source of guidance in Islam right after the Quran, and the methodology behind it is honestly absolutely brilliant.
Okay, let's dive straight into this. Here is what we're looking at today. First, we'll define exactly what hadith and sunnah are. Second, we'll break down the basic types of a hadith. Third, we'll trace the historical journey of how they were compiled. Fourth, we'll look at the most authentic books. And finally, we'll see how this massive legacy actually applies to daily life.
So, starting right off with Section 1, what exactly are Hadith and Sunnah?
Establishing these foundational definitions right out of the gate is absolutely essential for everything else we're going to discuss. Linguistically, the word hadith just means a talk or news. But in Islamic terminology, it's so much more than just spoken words. It actually encompasses three main things. First, qawl, which are the sayings or spoken words of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Then there's fil, and this refers to his physical actions and his lifestyle. And finally, taqrir. This one is incredibly fascinating. These are things that his companions did right in his presence, and he didn't stop them. He silently approved. So when you put all that together, the hadith becomes a fully comprehensive 360-degree model of the Prophet's entire life. Now, it's really vital that we clear up a super common myth right here. A lot of people think hadith and sunnah are just the exact same thing, but they actually have different scopes. Think of the hadith as the historical report itself, the narrated words perfectly captured in text. The sunnah, on the other hand, well, that's the practical, lived tradition. It's the physical application of those reports passed down generation to generation in the actual daily lives of Muslims. So they're deeply connected, obviously, but they're not strictly identical. Moving right along to Section 2, the basic types of a hadith.
Okay, here is where we get into the real mechanics of how scholars built this intricate, virtually impenetrable security system for these reports. They basically graded them on two completely separate tracks. First, by the sanad, which is the chain of narrators. For example, a mutawatir report is narrated by so many people in every single era that it is statistically impossible for them to have colluded on a lie. Like, it's absolutely certain. Mashhur has at least 3 narrators per generation, and Khabar Wahid has 1 or 2, which means it requires really strict scrutiny. Then we have the grading by sihat, or authenticity, and this measures the actual narrators themselves. Sahih means the chain is perfect. The narrators have flawless memory and character, and there are 0 hidden defects. Hasan is just slightly below that in terms of memory strength. This dual-layered system ensured that false reports simply could not slip through the cracks. I want to slow down here for a quick second just to emphasize the sheer gravity of this grading system. At the bottom of the authenticity scale, you have da'if, or weak, hadith. These don't meet the strict conditions of sahih, so they absolutely cannot be used to form Islamic laws, though some scholars cautiously use them for moral virtues. But then you have mawdu. This means a completely fabricated or forged report, and the rules here are uncompromising. It is considered a severe sin to narrate a mawdu hadith or falsely attribute it to the Prophet. The scholarly rigor here is literally uncompromising. All right, Section 3, the historical journey of compilation. Imagine an entirely oral society that suddenly needed to transition to written text, all while making absolutely sure the Prophet's words never, ever got mixed up with the text of the Quran. It's like a giant puzzle. Early on, the Prophet actually forbade writing down his words because he wanted to completely protect the Quran from being mixed with his own statements. But once the Quran was totally secure, he permitted it. A companion named Abdullah bin Amr was given permission, and his written collection was called Al-Sadiqa. After the Prophet's passing, early leaders like Abu Bakr and Umar were intensely cautious. They relied on strict oral verifications so no false rumors would spread. The massive turning point, though, happens right here at 99 AH, when Caliph Umar bin Abdulaziz ordered the governor of Medina to officially and systematically write down and compile the hadith. This official compilation gave birth to something truly spectacular, Ilm ul-Rijal, or the science of narrators.
I really want you to appreciate the scale of this for a moment. Scholars literally traveled thousands of miles across deserts, on foot and on camels, for months at a time, just to verify a single narrator. They ran the ultimate historical background check. They investigated a narrator's daily life, their moral character, their piety, and exactly how strong their memory was. This immense, rigorous biographical evaluation is a completely unique invention by Muslim scholars. There is, no exaggeration, simply nothing else like it in human history.
That brings us to Section 4, the Sihah Sita, or the most authentic books. This is where we actually get to see the tangible masterpieces that resulted from centuries of this immense, back-breaking historical effort. The crucial point here is looking at what it took to compile the most famous of these books, Sahih Bukhari. Imam Bukhari, who was born in 94 AH, dedicated 16 years of his life to this task. He sifted through a staggering 600,000 historical reports. 600,000! And he didn't just read them quickly. Before writing down a single verified hadith, he would bathe and pray 2 units of prayer. Out of those 600,000, he selected just over 7,000 reports. Because of this unimaginably strict process, Sahih Bukhari is considered the most authentic book on earth after the Quran. But Bukhari isn't alone, right? It's part of the Sihah Sita, which are the 6 universally accepted books. You have Sahih Muslim, where Imam Muslim sifted through 300,000 reports, and this is considered nearly as authentic as Bukhari. Then there's Sunan Abu Dawud, which sifted 500,000 reports down to about 4,800, specifically focusing on practical Islamic law, or fiqh. Jami Tirmidhi is brilliant for students because it notes juristic differences and actually grades every single hadith. Sunan Nasa'i is renowned for having exceptionally strong chains of narration. And finally, Sunan Ibn Majah, rounding out the 6 with over 4,000 ahadiths. Each book brings a really unique and vital flavor to the preservation of the religion.
And, the legacy extends even beyond those 6. We absolutely have to acknowledge 2 other monumental works. First, the Muwatta of Imam Malik, which some scholars argue is even older and just as authentic as the 6. And then there's the Musnad of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, which is absolutely massive in volume, containing over 40,000 ahadith. The sheer volume of verified, authenticated historical data we're talking about here is just staggering.
Finally, Section 5, the Great Legacy and Our Lives. Okay, so we've talked a lot about history and scholarship, but you might be wondering, why does all of this ancient, rigorous preservation matter to someone living right now? Well, it brilliantly illustrates the real purpose of hadith. It's not just dry academic history. The Quran gives the overarching message, but the hadith is the practical day-to-day how-to guide. Like, how exactly do you physically pray? How do you fast? How do you socialize, visit the sick, or even just eat and sleep? Every single one of these daily human actions is mapped out perfectly in the hadith, making the Prophet's timeless model totally actionable for us today.
So, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Millions of miles were traveled. Lifetimes were spent sifting through hundreds of thousands of reports. Unimaginable sacrifices were made by brilliant scholars, all just to ensure that the exact truth of how to live a good life reached you and me intact. The profound question we really have to ask ourselves now is, are we honoring those unimaginable sacrifices by actually acting upon this great legacy in our daily lives? It's definitely something to deeply reflect on. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating subject, and I really hope this sparks your curiosity to learn even more.